News tonight. The Zimbabwean government says it's now planning to give compensation to white farmers who were forced off the land they occupied by the government of then Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. His land reform program, nearly 20 years ago now, saw 4,500 white farmers removed from the land they were farming. Mugabe's critics have said that program led to the economic crisis in Zimbabwe. A specialist in African politics at the University of the Witwatersrand, Dr. Mpofu, is in our studios in Pretoria. Dr. Mpofu, good evening to you. Thank you for your time this Tuesday evening. What's driving this move to compensate farmers who left this land probably 17, 18 years ago?
There's a lot of pressure that is being felt by the present regime to work over time to gain a political legitimacy, political credibility, and acceptance as a credible government in the world. So there are desperate attempts to buy positive world, especially Western and Eastern opinion.
So you're suggesting then this is not driven by internal Zimbabwean politics. This is not because, the people who vote for President Emerson Mnangagwa actually want this to happen. This is about literally other countries, the view of Zimbabwe in other countries?
Since the time of the colonial elites and the time of the post-colonial elites that included Robert Mugabe and Emerson Mnangagwa himself, the people of Zimbabwe and their historical and political interests have always taken a back seat as elites scramble for resources, accumulate and amass wealth as groups, as cliques, as factions and as individuals. I doubt that the pressure could be coming from the interests of the majority poor of Zimbabwe.
Does Zimbabwe, we all know that Zimbabwe has literally been in an economic crisis for at least 1.5 decades, perhaps 2 decades now, depending on how you judge these things. I would imagine that its government doesn't have much money. Does it have the money to actually pay back these farmers?
That is the problem, whereby political elites, for reasons of political expedience and opportunistic searches for cheap credibility, quickly make decisions that are not realistic and feasible. Just like the reform process itself was done in partisan, personal and political expedience and created a political catastrophe. This attempt as well is driven by political expedience and opportunism and is bound to further deepen the political and economic crisis in Zimbabwe, which is threatening to make the establishment actually a failed state.
If the aim of President Mnangagwa and the people around him is to restore credibility in the eyes of the rest of the world and other countries, do you think it will actually succeed in doing that? The way you're describing it, it'll just make the crisis worse. Could it actually make the image of Zimbabwe worse, perhaps?
They wish to achieve, to actually excite some international positive opinion on their part, but the way they are approaching it, they are doing it like an insulated regime that is not alive to how the world works, that is not alive to how international regimes and their relations operate. These are people that are in need of sober, informed and enriching advice. They are operating exactly like a faction and a military junta that they are, impervious to ideas and quite daring in the wrong and disastrous direction.
There are, of course, lots of problems facing Zimbabwe. It seems in a way that after the elections there last year, many people are actually almost less optimistic for the future than they were. Would you suggest that this is part of that? In other words, it's almost a slightly desperate move, perhaps?
Yes, this particular regime that is in forming the political establishment right now has much unfortunately squandered an opportunity that was created by the euphoria that came with the dethronement of Robert Mugabe. Through internal divisions of their own, poor advice and poor decision making, they squandered an opportunity to be heroic and to be received by the world as revolutionaries and deliverers. There was the shooting of civilians, arrest of opposition political leaders, reckless statements, and certain excitable individuals in the establishment that made statements that frightened Africa and frightened the world and showed that, after all, maybe Robert Mugabe, as failed as he was and as evil as he was much better than the present captains of the junta.
Dr. William Mpofu, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate it. A specialist in African politics at Wits University in our studios in Pretoria tonight.